Secret River Strangers. Examining ideas and aesthetic elements in Secret River. The opening of Strangers. The Alexander, with its cargo of convicts, had bucked over the face of the ocean for the better part of a year. Now it had fetched up at the end of the earth. There was no lock on the door of the hut where the William Thornhill had transported for the term of his natural life in the year of our Lord 1806 was passing his first night in His Majesty's penal colony of New South Wales. There was hardly a door, barely a wall, and only a flap of bark, a screen of sticks and mud. There was no need of lock, of door, of wall. This was a prison whose bars were 10,000 miles of water. So let's look at the first part. The Alexander, with its cargo of convicts, had bucked over the face of the ocean for the better part of a year. Now it had fetched up at the end of the earth. What can we find in here? Let's have a look. Well, here we have foreshadowing of the future cultural battle for legitimacy and control in the colony. They've been constructed as having arrived already in a state of fear, shame and confusion, establishing the psychological landscape. Also, the forced removal of the convicts from the inflexibly structured, culturally familiar setting of England has been represented as psychologically wrenching, traumatic by the text. The imagery is kinetic. They are bucked and fetched up like unwanted riders, suggested wild, uncontrolled movement. We get a sense of the convicts' perception of themselves as cast out, damned, exiled. They have no agency, and that sense of powerlessness is the lens they view Australia through. Anthropomorphism is at play here, constructing living creatures' emotions relatable to people and applying them to inanimate objects. The representation of the boat as a living and hostile bucking creature, flinging them unprepared onto the foreign soil, is important. The characterization establishes the convict's emotional fragility, feelings of powerlessness and fear. The new country is the end of the earth, suggesting an Anglo-centric perception that places Britain in a privileged psychological place, and anything not British as frightening and alien. The text is subverting the more traditionally adventurous representation of colonists in Australian historical literature. There was no lock on the door of the hut. There was no need of lock, of door, of wall. This was a prison whose bars were 10,000 miles of water. Thornhill's later psychological motivation for his attempts to recreate a European-style home, then manor, is prepared here with Thornhill's hostility to the landscape, or more specifically, his perception of it as hostile to him. The construction of a kind of carceral cell where the domestic residence is a prison that keeps them in, out of fear of the outside, is a defining characteristic of Australian frontier and colonial fiction. Thornhill's compulsion to build fences around himself and his family is a way of keeping their Englishness in and the unknown landscape and its people out. Later, when his son attempts to engage with the Aboriginal culture, he beats him, establishing himself as his family's jailer. This compulsion is a rejection of the unfamiliar, with a dark subtext that the land and 10,000 miles of water will render his efforts inconsequential. The prison is in their minds, a siege mentality. This psychologically constructs them to respond viciously to anything they see as threatening their fragile connection to home and security. Thornhill can only imagine success within England's class system, so will fight to maintain it in this new country. The year of our Lord 1806 was passing his first night in His Majesty's Penal Colony of New South Wales. I read that a bit strange, but you get the idea. The Anglo-centric perception of time, place, and social order of the English is established by Grenville in this first paragraph. The social and psychological setting from the colonist's perspective is distinctly and myopically English, regardless of the physical setting being Australia. Ownership of the place is already legitimised in their minds, a chattel of His Majesty's, in a land labelled for the more familiar Wales. Not only is it theirs, extinguishing any claim in their minds of the original inhabitants to legitimate ownership, but it also exemplifies their intention to replicate their society in this new country in place of whatever pre-existed there. The year of our Lord demonstrates an assumption from a Christian perspective. Time is being measured by the Christian calendar, the Gregorian one. This is part of Grenville's shaping and understanding in her readers of the text as examining the colonists' cultural perspective, not the Indigenous Australians. This can be interpreted either as silencing their viewpoint or alternatively highlighting the historical narratives genre's traditional exclusion of Indigenous voices through the establishment of an extremely myopic cultural perspective of the colonists so early. Alternatively, it simply replicates it. Now, here are some questions from old exams for you to consider. Now, none of these questions are a perfect fit. The idea is to stretch you by asking you to use what you've just read and discuss it to see what you could do with these questions. You are expected to think. Which would you choose? Why would you choose it? 1. Genre and subgenre can be an effective way to challenge social practices and discourses that marginalise others in society, discussed with reference to one or more texts you have studied. That's from the West Australian exam papers from 2016. Discuss how our interpretation of ideological perspective in one or more texts studied, shaped by an awareness of cultural change and difference over time. That's another one from West Australian exam papers from 2016. Reading practices are ways that readers make meaning of a text, discuss how multiple ways of reading lead to a depth of understanding that might not otherwise be gained of one or more texts you have studied. That's from the ETA 2017. By the way, the text before, instead of is, it should have said is. And here's just a list of all the artwork that I used, where I got it from best I could. Of course, it's all from the internet. Just in case you're interested, I chose it because it either reflected the text or it reflected mythologies regarding colonisation from Australian history. A lot of the paintings were by the Heidelberg School of Impressionists.